But even if you, for instance, are using a big model with like a very large context window, you have an attention problem.
A few years ago, everything needs to be on a blockchain, like even like, despite the fact most days. I want all of this to be extremely useful to anyone who's just a complete open source warrior, don't want anything proprietary, don't trust any companies, that's fine.
All your AI really needs is accurate documentation of how to do that.
Welcome to another episode of the AI Product Engineer. And as is always in this channel, we always discuss about the latest developments in AI building, in application building with generative AI, in building agentic workflows, agents, RAG applications, and so much more. And in this episode, we have fantastic discussion with Michael and Sean, CTO and CEO, both co-founders at Jentic. Jentic is a startup, is a platform in the agentic space. And of course, there so many things are happening. We see from frameworks, we see from things that are being developed in order for us that get better results with our agents. So you might be asking, where does Jentic come in here? Well, the question is the following. What happens once you start having many tools for your agents? Point one. And point two, not only that, but also, for example, if you're relying on the MCP protocol from Anthropic. Well, maybe first at the beginning, it might be easy when you have a couple of tools. But as you grow, you have more complexity. You also have many more things you need to pay attention to. The risk of things going wrong, becoming hard to maintain. But not only that, also for your LLM of getting confused, become higher. And therefore, we need to think of what can we do instead? How can we deal with a feature where our agents might have hundreds of different tools, and yet they need to be agile, they need to be responsive, the latency needs to be as little as possible. This is where Jentic comes in, where with Jentic, what you have is basically one single layer that allows you to reach all possible tools, and not only that, using an open standard. Jentic has open sourced Oak. Oak is a repository based on the OpenAPI Araxo framework that allows to specify APIs in a standardized way, meaning we do not need anymore that think, hey, is this API call properly formed? Is this API call maybe in a format that might not be necessarily something that is, let's say, future-proof? Well, all that changes with Oak. And on top of that, they've made the effort of basically documenting over 1,000 tools and workflows from the most popular software that's out there. Meaning, there are so many tools, there is so much software that is not agentic ready, that the API is even poorly documented, where it's a problem. And with Jentic and Oak, this becomes no longer an issue. So as you'll see in the conversation, you'll be seeing how the team has very interesting ideas, not only about the future of agents, agentic workflows, but also what it means to be working with MCP, the MCP server standard from Anthropic, and if they believe if this makes sense long term. So before we started, remember the like, subscribe, leave your comments, let me know what you think. If you have questions for them, of course, ping me. And just another caveat. During the recording, there were some technical issues. My camera died. So we make a big effort that provide a seamless experience. But as you'll see, this was recorded in two different segments. This does not affect the conversation, what they had to say. So let's listen and let me know your thoughts. Basically, my first question is, so here, MCP, you wrote this blog post where you're very critical about it. Why don't you tell us what's wrong with MCP? Everyone's liking it, it's viral. What's the problem?
Yeah, well, it's very easy to use. It's magic when you add an MCP server to an agent and you kind of see it just take off with these new capabilities, right? So like say, Cursor or Windsurf, just like this. It's I'm on agent, and then you add Playwright or Puppeteer or British Search or something like that to it. It's amazing. So it's very tempting. But we're going in this direction where if you look at Smithery or Glama or any of the other directories, I mean, I checked yesterday and we were up to, I think, nearly 6,000 different MCP servers. These are mostly just wrapping existing APIs that are out there. And the temptation on this path is just to keep on adding MCP servers into your agent, right? Which is loading tool context into the agent just in case it's needed. I mean, that approach doesn't scale. It chews up the context window, spending it on tool information that may or may not be used, right? And that context window should really be reserved for task memory and reasoning. So first of all, if you have a limited context window and you've used it all for tool descriptions, you're going to run into difficulties when you get to the end of that context window, and something important is going to scroll out the other end. But even if you, for instance, are using a big model with like a very large context window, you have an attention problem, right? That the information that the model is paying attention to includes all of these tools, which in most situations aren't relevant to what it's currently doing. So it's just not an approach that to us makes any real sound sense from an engineering perspective or can scale. You know, if we want to make agents really capable in the future and maintain reliability as we do it, we're currently on this path where the more capabilities you try to add to an agent, the less reliable they get. That's a dead end.
Yeah, I think that, like, I definitely agree with all of that. Like it's clear there's magic in plugging in some kind of external knowledge to be available for your context for your agent that you're developing with, for instance. But I mean, NCP is kind of the first thing that's come along, and it was kind of put out by Anthropic when it was at last November or October, November. Clearly, it was just a first effort at allowing people to do this themselves. But obviously, I mean, I think people are coming to realize there's no risk security built into it. There's no, the scaling problems that Sean is talking about just haven't been addressed. So, and like this notion, I'm not going to harp on this a bit more of a notion of people kind of deciding now every API needs to be an MCP server and you load up your context. So it just feels like bad engineering to me. I mean, surely like there are better ways to do this. And I mean, that's one of the, kind of the key points.
So there's kind of mania. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's it. And don't accuse like everyone of this mania, but a lot of us are falling into it. MCP mania, or it's a kind of like a crowd of people who want to build Web 4.0 in the image of MCP, like throw away all the old web services, throw away HTTP, rebuild it all with agents and MCP. And I really think like agents and MCP are additive to the existing internet infrastructure, not a replacement. Yeah, and that we need to draw a distinction that MCP is more like a protocol. It's actually literally a protocol. But it's not a schema. All right, so trying to use MCP to represent the canonical schema for an API is a misuse. We already have things like OpenAPI and Razo and specifications. Like OpenAPI is 14 years old, and its third major version has like huge industry adoption, like a massive ecosystem of tools.
Right, a lot coming as well.
There's a fourth one coming out, and it's incredibly descriptive. I mean, in ways that MCP can never get close to. If you try to expand MCP to represent the amount of detail that you can get in OpenAPI, MCP wouldn't be good at its primary job anymore. It would no longer be easy to use or ergonomical for agents to interface with. It's basically, we have to distinguish protocol versus schema. MCP is the former, not the latter.
Yeah, makes sense. It's kind of reminding me of like a few years ago, everything needs to be on a blockchain. Like even like, despite the fact most things definitely shouldn't be in a blockchain. And that's kind of like that. Or maybe even I remember if you're really old, like everything needs to be in Corba now, that kind of thing. It's really like, we go through this phase, it's one of these kind of excitement phases. Maybe kind of us older people understand that when we see the hype, we kind of reconcile for yourself. Yeah.
If we think about previous waves of innovation and then we compare it to what's happening now with agents, which parallels do you see? What do you feel it'll repeat? And maybe where here Jentic comes in?
Well, there's a paradigm, at least in the way we're approaching this, right? To make this scale, we're taking this just-in-time tooling approach, where instead of trying to front-load all its tool context into the agent upfront, which you could do by shoving information into the system prompt or by loading a large MCP manifest. Instead of going that way, we're doing just-in-time tool loading. So at the last minute, as the agent is executing through its plan and needs to try to find a tool that can satisfy its current goal or intent, it comes to us and it looks it up and we find it. That as an approach is very, to me, it rhymes a lot with the idea of late binding in some programming languages that many people mightn't remember now, but did exist.
I'm old, so I remember that.
or kind of the idea of using a DLL instead of the static library back in an old-fashioned C and C++ days. Or in the 2000s era, there was an idea of enterprise service bus and service-oriented architecture and service discovery, right? So in an enterprise where distributed systems were trying to find each other, that there would be a directory and you would look the thing up at the last minute. It's basically about decoupling, right? And if you want something to scale, often you need to decouple the data from the code at some point, so you can do different things with different pieces. And I think that's what we're basically doing with just-in-time.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's kind of a new architecture, but it's also relying on kind of a traditional foundation as well. I mean, we've talked about kind of the merging of the deterministic and the non-deterministic worlds, and really where those meet, I think people are struggling with now, or at least the industry as a whole is trying to kind of come to grips with. We're taking a bit of an opinionated approach there, I think, and saying that, okay, all of this is down to declarative API use, workflows. That's all declarative. That like an LLM doesn't need to know about this, because you can capture this information. You know, our old repository that we just started, I mean, it has thousands of workflows there just to get started, but you know, we're going to be adding to that over time as people, you know, come up with new workflows to get added back. We kind of have this thing we're calling a flywheel of that being improved over time. But fundamentally, we can use AI to enhance these workflows or create these workflows, but once they're there, they're declarative and they work every time. And that's I mean, that's where we're kind of putting our cards at the moment on how we just
real data approach.
yeah.
And I should say about the just-in-time idea that it's not something that just we have invented. I think a lot of people are finding their way to this anyway, right? If you needed to add a lot of different tools into your agent, you quickly find that its reliability drops off a cliff after you add more than a few, because it'll call the wrong tool at the wrong time, pass the wrong parameters, or make something up as you give it more and more tools to juggle in its attention. So people are beginning to load the tools into a RAG system and then load it on the fly, right? Which is basically what we're doing. And that's not like the hard science of it, right? The overall effort for us is trying to foster this community effort where we move all of this tool knowledge into open source in a declarative format that we can all cooperate on, that isn't tied to any particular platform, any particular AI or agent framework. It's basically JSON files. And it's great that we were able to become a member of the Open API initiative and embrace, first of all, the Open API spec, which is 90% of the way there for what agents need for API operations. And now the Arazzo spec, which is the same thing, basically, but for workflows. So workflows composed out of multiple API operations, possibly crossing vendors, possibly composed of sub-workflows. And that's now available on Arazzo. And it allows us to express all that information in data cleanly in a file that we can put in an open source repository, and we can all work on together and make it as good as possible.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's key. I mean, most of my work that I've done previous to Jentic for the past 10 years has all been out in the open or open source. I'm a big believer kind of doing stuff out in the open. I think stuff like this in particular, I mean, it's the foundation for the agentic future. Like, LLMs are good at thinking. We kind of need the hands right now. And I think that, you know, API access is part of that. But I don't think anybody really gets to own this future. Like, it's all open knowledge. If we want to get to a point where it's good enough to be used for kind of general purpose AI, maybe we can talk with universal agent next, which is kind of where we think that this is all heading. It needs to be open. It needs to belong to everybody. So, I mean, we've started the old project. I mean, we have our own tools and services. Some of them are going to be proprietary, yeah, because they have to be. But really the core of it, the focus, the exciting part, I think, is the fact this is all a big project that we're all in together. And if we can all kind of come together and build this knowledge repository, the whole world is going to be better off as a result.
I'd like to underscore like an implication of this that maybe wasn't even necessarily clear to us when we started the company. That we think that in this future wave of AI, like, there isn't really going to be integration layers as we've known them before. And if you think of it, an integration layer pre-AI, you'd normally be thinking of a company that's got a collection of integrations that they've built in, maybe thousands. They might be called things like connectors or have some other name, but in some way it's a proprietary walled garden with special access to APIs because they've done the hard work of dealing with all those for you. And you maybe have like a simplified interface into that, or maybe a visual design thing. That's great for that era, but AI can basically one-shot integration work, right? The integrations aren't like the hard part anymore. You don't need to go through a middleman so that you can access an API. All your AI really needs is accurate documentation of how to do that. And once you start viewing it from the documentation or knowledge perspective or this data-driven perspective, it just like patently clear this is going to be an open source project and it's not going to be owned. And whatever takes the place of integration platforms in the future is not going to have the same dynamics. It's not just basically, there's no room for walled garden. There's room for maybe a big open source project where we all collaborate to perfect this information, possibly with dynamic feedback from actual agents in the wild. And there's room for companies providing ancillary services. We're one of those. And that's it.
Likely, you're wondering, hey, I want to get started building agentic workflows, but I don't know how because there's so much going on, so many tools, so many libraries, so much content around. Where can I get started? Well, that's where AI Product Engineer comes in. AI Product Engineer is a place where every developer, every hacker, every builder can get started with AI agents, RAG applications, generative AI tools. If you're wondering how you can get started, where to get started, then why are you waiting? Just go to AI Product Engineer and join the community. There are thousands of us already building together AI apps. Don't wait any longer. Come and join. For companies who want to get started integrating with Oak, integrating with Jentic, what is that they need to do? Because of course, not everyone has a nice REST API, not everyone has a nice documentation, especially older software, enterprise software, and yet they might be interested in saying, hey, I want to get, supporting agentic systems. So what's in it for them? How can they get involved?
First of all, there's a few different kind of ways of approaching this. If you have a public API, like you are a service that you provide your services to clients or end users, but your API is public, we want to make sure that we have the best representation of your API possible in our Oak repository, so that anyone who wants to use the thing or integrate your API or your service into their agents can just come along and do it without even having to think about the code of the integration. It's all just there. They have to bring their authentication keys at the moment. We're doing work on that as well. And there you go, you're integrated. So we hope that, not just, kind of popular services out there, but also kind of even more kind of localized ones, or even more kind of, niche services. If you have an API, you should be able to represent it in Oak and make sure all your definitions and workflows are up to date in Oak. And then, anyone who wants to integrate it into their agents will have free, unfettered access to it. In the more corporate case, let's say you're, a larger corporation, you're a CIO, you have a collection of agents, you might not actually have a collection of agents because you're really worried about the implications of agents and, what APIs they're accessing, what data they're accessing. You have no control over this at the moment because it's kind of the Wild West. So one of the other goals of Jentic is, we can take a version of kind of all this open source and a tool stack and apply that to an on-prem version. So bring your own GitHub repository with your own APIs. We'll apply all of the same tooling to it, and then provide extra tools around integration and, a dashboard for what your agents are doing. That's all coming in the future, and that's kind of part of our roadmap plans, but that's basically where we think this and where we're heading with this. Yeah.
Let me rewind a bit and try that again in case add something to it. Yes. So what if you're a company that's got an API and you want to get it into Jentic so that agents can access it? First of all, our hope is that we have already loaded it into Jentic. Right? So we've started off with over 1,500 open API specifications, which we've found across the web. We've loaded those in. We've cleaned them as we went, so they go in the front of the machine. AI works in this to make sure that they're all properly formed and have the kind of information we need to work with them. And then we have like a standard version that comes out the other side. If it's not in there already, you can post an issue on our GitHub, and we have bots that will automatically process that into the repository. So it'll be there in a few hours. But overall, I hope that in a short amount of time, as soon as an open API spec appears on the internet that we haven't seen before, we'll guzzle it down and get it into the repository automatically without any further work. The next question, though, about that, let's say it's public API of some type, whether that's a SaaS service or something else, is workflows. Because when APIs become often most useful, it's not single operations, but it's sequences of operations you do within the API, or sometimes a sequence of operations you do that spans multiple APIs. So you put them together to achieve some kind of useful task. So where do those workflows come from? If you as the API vendor have ideas of those, you can submit an issue in the Oak GitHub repository. And again, a bot will spot that and try to create that workflow automatically. But as we scale out, we're also looking at production telemetry from agents that have permissioned us to try to improve the repository based on what they actually achieve. So as we see agents battling through scenarios, trying to find a path to achieve their goal by putting operations together, when they find that happy path and get to the end of their goal and achieve success, if we have that telemetry, then we can build a new workflow from that. And then that's there in the repository for all future agents that are working with Jentic to benefit from. And as soon as we have a workflow for something, out for a goal, that goal, accomplishing that goal and executing it becomes fully deterministic. So every single workflow boosts the reliability and the performance and speed of agents working with us, step by step.
Yeah. And when we say telemetry, we don't mean obviously not collecting private data. They're just data about the workflows themselves, whether they succeeded, whether they didn't, and what to kind of bring back into our Observability. So yeah, permission, etc. So
Most people hear Jentic, Oak, and so on for first time. So how would you describe to them what is each one? And then, for example, when they need one, when they need the other, do they complement each other? Are there separate offerings?
Right, so easy enough. Jentic is the company. Jentic is a play on the word agentic, and our belief in the general future software is agentic. We've delineated Oak from our brand because we think that Oak genuinely needs to exist whether or not Jentic exists. Our view of the future is quite opinionated on this, but agents need this shared knowledge layer of what tools exist and how to use those tools. In other words, OpenAPI specs and Erasmus specs and any other suitable specifications that come along down the line. This is a shared project. It's a shared challenge that we all face building agents, and it should be continually solved in one place. And that's useful outside of Jentic. It's clear to us that this needs to exist. We want to build in the future that exists. And it turned out that in order to do so, we had to create that project and launch it and invest in it and commit to stewarding it. But it's Oak and not Jentic because it exists outside of Jentic. It should have its life separate to Jentic. We welcome all other collaborators. We welcome partners, open indie developers, island competitors to come in and run this thing with us. We want to be in that future, not in this interstitial phase where people are still trying to own integrations as if there's something proprietary.
yeah, absolutely. And that's a genuine effort from all of us here. That's just, I can't overstate how important that open source aspect of everything is.
How many integrations are already there on Oak, and what's the plan? Is there a limit? Is it all software should be on Oak?
But all software, but certainly anything with an API at the moment. Right now, we're talking about open API stacks, but I think the definition of tools that AI will need access to in the future is a lot broader than that. It's, legacy APIs, async APIs, Unix tools, weird stuff through some calm thing connected to Subbinder. Oh, also the stuff from the 90s will have you they have this shit interface. But yeah, basically, yeah. And that's a definition of a tool. We don't necessarily have the schemas to describe all of this. I do think OpenAPI 4 is doing quite a lot of work.
OpenAPI 4 is set to take a broader view than just REST and include, for example, support for JSON RPC, which is great. And it's really designed, I think, for machine use and agents rather than previous versions, which really had a human consumer beyond optimization, for example, as the end user.
And Arazzo's kind of the same thing. Just another point maybe missed in an earlier bit of the conversation. A lot of people trying to build agents, they kind of take an open API stack and then they put, one tool call per API call or API operation behind it and try and get that working. Again, that confuses the context. And then something like Arazzo, which is coming out, which is a new format. It does this declarative kind of workflows, and it actually allows you to execute workflows in sequence kind of deterministically and cleanly without needing to write a lot of code for it. I mean, that didn't exist a few years ago. That's a new spec that we're also hopefully helping to shepherd. We're part of the Linux Foundation as well. That is moving that along, and also it kind of mirrors maybe it's a little bit besides the point, but if you're a developer and a human developer and you need to do something manually in your code with an API, the first thing you're going to do, you're not going to read every single function in the open API spec and say, okay, I'll figure it out from there. You're going to look for a document or a tutorial or something telling you what order should these be called in for this specific purpose. And that's really what Arazzo is good at doing, describing those workflows. And of course, you can use all this without Jentic, but Jentic gives you a nice interface into searching all of that and indexing that, the just-in-time tool use we just talked about. So there's definitely I want all of this to be extremely useful to anyone who's just a complete open source warrior, don't want anything proprietary, don't trust any companies, that's fine. That's all there for you to use as well. But there'll definitely be benefits on top of that to using Jentic tools on top of that, and that's the way we're
I think a good way to help color this in for anyone watching or listening is the Oak Runner, which you haven't mentioned. So we've, alongside the Oak repository of thousands of open API specs, thousands of Arazzo specs, tens of thousands of API operations, growing all the time. We've published an open source library called Oak Runner. This is Python at the moment, but from Python you can import that library, pip install it, import it, and you can run any API operation or any workflow directly, just like this. So it's kind of like a whole new way of thinking about higher level API abstractions. I was thinking about this earlier in the walk into work. I've used the Stripe API before. It's very large, very wonderful API, multiple layers, much like the good API design in any piece of software, any library will often have layers, lower layers and more abstract layers. So that you can try to use the most abstract layer where it fits, but you can go under the hood when necessary. And many APIs are the same. Stripe is one example. With Arazzo, it's such a game changer because as an API designer, you could ship just those most primitive operations and then create Arazzo files that layer on top of that. And the Oak Runner library that we've shipped that demonstrates that you can just then run in a single line any of those higher level workflows that exercise those low level API primitives. It really helps move so much software out of Python code or Ruby or Java or whatever the backend is into a common standard descriptive format, which is then totally platform and language agnostic, and that we can all collaborate on. So I think Arazzo is a game changer, and just using the Oak Runner just to palpably demonstrates that.
There's just one thing that I need to add for that is that you keep saying Arazzo and I keep saying Arazzo because I think it's too Italian not to say Arazzo. So if somebody out there keeps clear this up for us, it's a for all, I'd be happy to hear that.
It's like tomato and tomato, right?
Yeah, Arazzo.
Yeah, we eat pizza later.
And for the users, for the consumers who are, for example, seeing all these descriptors on Oak or seeing the Oak Runner, what's they can build right now? So if they go to the repository, are there any interesting APIs that you like to highlight and then you see, hey, maybe worth checking out?
XKCD is pretty good.
It's also one operation or two operations, okay, get calls. So that's the first one we started on. It's interesting because we started to do this at one point, actually, try to index open API specs by how kind of immediately usable they were by AI in general. I think XKCD was down there. We've moved up a little bit since, so we kind of had this perpetual, movement towards using more and more complex APIs as we go, because obviously this is a long-term thing. So we started off with XKCD, which was the simplest API we could find in a repository. We've moved on to New York Times. Discord API is what we've been using quite a lot because it's not trivial getting operators to work in there. I think 11 Labs for Spoop is starting to look at a little bit as well because we were at a beta there with them a couple of weeks ago. It's okay, put this import your API. Yeah, fully at that. Very trusty voice.
There's 1,500 and APIs in there, and There's currently less than 20 of us. So we really help to find all the interesting use cases.
Yeah.
But we're sure they're there. Yeah. And it's maybe worth mentioning that like we're like on the roadmap we have authentication and permissions at the next major step. And this is really going to enable a lot of the use cases as we move it on, as we make it more and more seamless for agents who don't have any hard-coded authentication and information about particular APIs to just grab one and go out of Jentic. I think it's going to be a big enabler if it's going to help a lot of people very quickly discover very interesting use cases. And in fact, I should amend that sentence. Not even people, allow agents to find a lot of very interesting use cases.
What I also have to clarify, like this is a work in progress. There's a lot of companies out there claim that have all these integrations and this and that, but we're really taking a long-term view in there. So all of the stuff we have in there is verified, kind of the workflows we have existing are verified, but there's going to be a huge effort to continue to refine these workflows, make sure they stay up to date when new versions of APIs come out. We're going to use AI as much as possible to help us with that process, but also we need human feedback and interaction. So if you're using this and you find a workflow doesn't work, that's fine. Just go to our repository, open a ticket, we'll get it merged immediately. If you do, create some workflows yourself and find they're working, that's great as well, but send them back to us. PR them back. We have processes by which
In plain English.
yeah. Simpler than just, doing a PR is going to be a bit cumbersome sometimes. And yeah, feed that back to us at the best you can. Make it available for the next person who needs to do exactly the same thing.
Thinking of the future, let's separate from now, which type of software you'd like to see being built with Jentic and built with Over?
This is the universal agent for me, right? Yeah. Like the longer and deeper I think about agents, the more it seems to me like most of the kind of tributaries and streams are all going to lead down to this river. They'll all flow towards the universal agent. And I'm using this term, I think, Sundar Pichai used it last summer, talking about Google's Project Astra. But basically, whether you call it an agent or an assistant or something else, it's an LLM-driven process. It's making plans, and it has access to an arbitrary number of tools. Right. So when it comes up with a plan, you can ask it anything. It'll try to do the plan within the means as basically the capabilities you've given it, what tools you have installed. I think that's incredibly powerful. It's in contrast to specialized agents, and there's so many, or vertical agents, right? So many AI startups today. That's one path, but I have a feeling that the universal agent might be the future, and that these might be pre-built pieces of software. There might be fewer than we expect. Like, what general agent runner do you is your daily runner? What's mine? I might have one, you might have another. And then we hook Jentic in, or maybe a Jentic competitor in the future. And we have one interface where we just turn on different tools. And more tools to turn on, the more capabilities that agent has. Or if you just want a finance agent, you just turn on SOC 2 compliant finance tools in your organization. But you have then a general purpose agent running there. And some company has specialized in making the best agentic reasoning loop. And you've hooked it up to your favorite tool provider. That's dynamically provisioning those capabilities in. I think that's the pattern. I think that's basically what our on-device assistants are and are about to be. And that we're all about to expect to have the same capabilities and power in our businesses and in other parts of our lives. And perhaps we'll call it the universal agent.
That's it, yeah. It's actually scary how little code an agent should be in the future. Like, I maybe that the new plus access to all the agentic knowledge. I think I'm going to put one on our Discord actually in a week or two. Maybe not the final version, but certainly I'd like to have a version of that universal agent connected to all the just-in-time tooling available in Jentic, and then maybe keep a little index on that to see how far close we are to this kind of universal agent.
But it is a shockingly powerful part.
Yeah, it is.
Because the code is so short.
Yeah.
And when you look at it, it contains no business logic.
Yeah.
Nothing specific to the application, no auth credentials, no access permission management, no particular logic about accounting or bookkeeping or whatever its one purpose might be. It's just a generic reasoning loop. That's it. And everything else is abstracted out to a tooling layer, where you turn on tools based on whatever policies you might have. You might restrict tools based on other policies. Rate limiting costs, all kinds of things can go into that central tooling layer. And that's where you control it.
We have a demo of this as well. We have a video, just simply as an option in a short case, but using 2 APIs, and then no pre-existing business logic whatsoever. LLM, it's Claude code, then connected to Jentic and performing operations that the users asked and figuring out how to do it itself, and it all worked in the end. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a really a big example of this universal agent.
Yeah,
that works. So it works. Like that.
So we'll see. It's something we support if that's the way the future goes. But it's exciting and scary, and I think we all know that AI is replacing software engineers, and I think we're talking about the universal agent replacing software.
So you see a future where there are no longer software engineers.
Yeah,
not coders anyway.
Yeah, I mean, what's vertical SaaS is something that we kind of talk about a bit and feels a bit shaky at the moment. Like, what is a SaaS product? Like, it's a database, and then a lot of human UI stuff to help humans interact with the data in that database. So if you think about it, if humans are no longer needing to interact with the database and agents are well enough equipped with information to reason, as LLM reasoning is getting better over time. I don't think there's any question about that. All they need is the knowledge, and if that's all there, why do we need all of these SaaS products to manipulate the database underneath? What agents can just do this directly in an interface? You don't at all. Yeah.
Do you have any spicy takes and anything that's controversial of its space?
I think a lot of what we just kind of qualified.
Maybe. I think an interesting question is, what kind of agents are we talking about? A lot of people mean a lot of different things by agents. When you strip away a lot of the misuses of the term, I think there's two camps. One is the computer use agent, people building a very impressive technology that uses a user interface, a human user interface designed for humans, but clearly through that can accomplish anything a human could do on a computer. And then there's agents as we mean it, which isn't the same. We're thinking about agents that operate purely at the data layer, operating against machine interfaces, not human interfaces. And I guess we're making the bet that the future of agents is our version, not computers using human interfaces, but computers using machine interfaces. But I know a lot of people would disagree with us on that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like, I mean, it's impressive and all, watching an agent, so you're driving your mouse and doing stuff and you're, moving your windows around or checking your veil, different stuff, but it just seemed like completely the wrong approach to it. Like that, all of that stack, the whole desktop application windows, it's all human interface stuff. Like, it reminds me, like when I was one of my first jobs starting out is in like the late 90s or something. I was doing some legacy software trying to interface into a legacy system. And it was this IBM toolkit, SNA toolkit, basically, dump terminals into mainframes, right? And it's all green terminals and no logic on the client. But the only way to get information off of it was to stream scrape. There were APIs that IBM provided to scrape, go character by character, emulating a terminal and scraping information out of that. And it just seems like so much, of a stack of stuck in the middle that doesn't need to be there.
Very tall, fragile stuff. Yeah. But also, that's all feels like incredibly expensive to run, slow, energy hungry, and has all this kind of unreliability introduced inherently by AI, which is obviously a little bit, this chaos in the middle. All this where you have AI there. From our perspective, like in our vision of the future, we see agents operating against machine interfaces through a system like us. But more than that, we see us identifying all of the ways they use APIs, those workflows, and we're identifying those and essentially caching them into something like Erasa, so that the next agent that comes along that has that particular goal or intent gets the benefit from that cached workflow rather than having to discover it for itself. Whenever there's a workflow, that all gets executed deterministically in regular old code without going into the LLM. So I'm tempted to look at the whole thing as some kind of global scale computer architecture with a cache in it. And we're starting from a cold start. We're priming our cache using AI. We're generating these workflows just using AI agents and research agents that we've developed to speculate about useful workflows and to create the Razo files. But as the whole thing runs, that cache is going to warm up from real edges, discovering workflows, or expressing real needs or intents that they need that will QR research agents to solve this for the next time. So when that cache is warm, these agents are all operating against machine interfaces, but the LLMs are becoming decreasingly taxed pious because more and more of the actual work is shifting into deterministic code as we discover repeatable workflows. I mean, that's how agents get scalable, fast, cheap, and every time there's a workflow, 100% reliable. Right? It's totally incomparable to the idea of an expensive agent trying to get a mouse to click on the scroll bar properly. Right?
Yeah, like you don't need to consume the energy of a small village just to figure out how to use an API. Like that's, yeah, it just belongs in the deterministic space. So
You might be enjoying right now the conversation with Sean and Michael. However, most of our viewers are not subscribers. They've not hit the subscribe button. So I really encourage you to do that because the more subscribers we have, the more attractive we become for highly interesting startups, highly interesting guests, and therefore we can present you many more interesting conversations with those who are building the future of AI. So hit the subscribe button and let's continue the show. Inside every agent, there is a model. And right now, the space is pretty much dominated by a couple of players. Do you see that staying for long? Or do you think we're headed towards a future where this is like a commodity and everyone's of hosting? Or do you think this is something that requires so much compute, so much infrastructure that only a selected few are in a position to deploy that is so create these models?
I think, in my estimation, new technologies, when they come out, they start off proprietary, that they trend towards open source over a while, like over 10 years. Like, paying for your networking stock would have been proprietary in the 80s, and then 50, 20 years later, all of that stuff is kind of there free. A little bit different with models because a lot of them cost so much to train, and there's a hell of expense involved in training a new model and keeping models up to date. But I think over time, models will become, the open source and free models will become good enough for the purpose. Like the cutting edge beating, highest IQ models, whatever, those are always going to be proprietary, I think, or at least for the foreseeable future. But right behind them, moving just as quickly, you have the open source models or the free models or the models you can actually run yourself. So, and also we may have to move it to more specific models if people kind of get better understanding how they work, how to trade them for the specific purposes that you could have a model that's, for a particular API or the Jentic model that's really, really good. I don't quite know how that's going to work out, but that's basically where I see that.
I think we're still very early in model architectures.
Yeah.
And if you think about, let's say Windsurf, which we hear is getting acquired for $3 billion, right? Its agent, which I love, is really just a single context window, right? So when we're using it, we always try to, if switch to the best model, it's 3.7 1 week, then we move to 2.2, like Gemini 2.5, or whatever, OpenAI. We switch between them to get to the latest cutting edge, most intelligent model, because we only have this one context window. But this field is going to mature, and we're going to end up with different models handling different parts of the task. And if you're in a situation where, like, the vision that we see about workflow knowledge becoming basically discovered by AI and cached and made available back to AI, when all of that workflow knowledge and know-how is available on demand, you don't normally need the most intelligent, most expensive, biggest model to run that kind of stuff. You can probably have quite an efficient, small, edge device model running that kind of stuff. And you only need to shift into a higher intelligence model when you really need to think hard because you're hitting up against some kind of novel situation. So I think we've still yet to discover all of those architectures and how we plumb that together so that most of the time your model, probably, if you're anything like me, is not putting a lot of effort in. It's relying on know-how, existing know-how. And only when it's a novel situation, it goes, oh, hang on, I'm going to have to use my, my slow thinking for this one.
Most companies have never deployed an agent or developed one or run one. For most developers, that's well the case. How can they get started, and also where can Oak help them?
Well, if they need to get started, he just jumped right in.
Yeah, you've jammy.
Ask your agent to build you an agent. That's the
Always yes, basically.
we're very, very close right now to someone shipping an agent building agent. Right, that's an investment I'd like to make. It's not going to be us, but I spot that company if they have an angel round up, and I'll throw something in. Because we have agent platforms right now, platforms you can build agents in, and there's so many of them, maybe hundreds, including all the hyperscalers have one. But there's nothing stopping an agent from building and deploying agents. So maybe one answer is wait a while. Once you go back years, the other version is start now with the closest thing that exists, which is probably to be Windsurf or Cursor, and go into one of those agentic coding environments and ask the agent in there to build you an agent. That's a fast way to get started.
Yeah, that's it. Like, I mean, there's a lot of agent tool builders and toolkits out there, like hundreds of them. There won't be in a few years, but I mean, it's such, the code for it, such simple. Like, you should be able to tell your agent to build you an agentic loop with whatever LLM or, whatever backend, hopefully Jentic or Oak or something. And, it's really a trivial piece of code at this point. I think for all say I can see some utility and maybe some, libraries for presenting, UI or request for information back from the user, and a little more kind of detailed than just like text or a chat window. That's kind of another thing we talked about, is other people have it. So that's probably another company from Jentic. But basically, yeah, jump in, get started, and realize that you're not dealing with a very complicated thing conceptually. It's code that has an LLM on it and access to a lot of API knowledge on the other end, and go from there, basically.
As a quick plug for us, but also just an interesting little illustration, you can put Jentic into Windsurf or into Claude just over MCP, just an MCP server you add in there. So then you have an agent, a coding agent, that has Jentic in it, so it can dynamically load knowledge about any API or workflow to do different things. And one of the things you can get that agent to do is to make you a baby agent. And one of the things you can get that mama agent to do when it's made the baby agent is to give it Jentic capabilities as well.
Yeah, that was like, we weren't quite sure. We had too many agents, and we had the developer agents and the resulting agents and the supporting agent. We just said, okay, baby agent, mama agent, everywhere I said, or it's up here.
In comparison, you say turtles all the way down, it'll be agents all the way down.
Agents, like little agent, like dolls being embedded. So
Yeah, why not? And some of them, sorry, it might be very short-lived, little baby agents. They might do single purpose, or, you know what, I'm an agent, I'm going to handle this task, but I'm actually going to just fork it off. I'm going to start up a new agent.
Fork agent, yeah.
Yeah, just for this one particular task. So its context window is totally clean. It's honed in on just one particular task, and it lives just as long as it takes to complete it and report back, and then it gets, killed.
Well, maybe we should change the terminology. Maybe that's what it is, yeah.
If there's one message that you'd like to leave the audience with, what will that be?
We'll have one each, I think. Okay, well, there. From my perspective, it's just join us, help us build this agentic knowledge layer. That's it.
Mm-hmm. I'll be a bit more contrarian then, and I would say join us in our view that cramming the context window full of thousands of MCP servers is the wrong direction. That's just not going to scale. That leaves you in this horrible situation of trying to trade off capability against reliability, and it's also just unnecessary. You just got to decouple the two things and handle them separately, and that's what we're about. So yeah, let's do that differently. MCP is great, but it's a way to hook into a system. It's not a replacement for everything. And then what I'd say.
I'm a shopper.
Where can they find you? Where can they find Jentic, Oak?
Yeah, well, Jentic.com, Jentic with a J.com. And you can find things to Oak from there. Oak's on GitHub, so, github.com/Jentic/Oak. you can get access to our MCP server there, join the Discord, find the docs, and we get going really for you.
Yeah, try it out. Find the docs. And most importantly, if you like bits of it, tell us. If you hate it, tell us. Feedback is important. This is a long-term project. So really looking forward to working with the community on this. Yeah, see where we go. We'll see what that builds. I'm excited. Yeah.
That's the code.
All right.
This is everything for today. And you've seen how Sean and Michael have a very clear vision of the future of AI agents. You've seen how they are very clear how the MCP standard is more like a transitory phase, a tool for today, but not for tomorrow. Not only that, but also how they believe that this future of AI agents will be open source, will be based on open standards, and therefore it'll be extremely important to have the right tools that be ready for this. If you're wondering where you can get started with Jentic, well, go to Jentic.com and just install the MCP server, join the Discord community, and let me know what is it that you think about it. Is it helping you? Or for example, you may be saying, hey, I'm just getting started here. How or what can I do instead? Well, you can also try the Oak repository, because even if you only have a couple of tools for your agent, and you might be thinking, this is not where I need right now a tool that orchestrate too many tools, too many APIs. Well, still, with the Oak standard, with the Oak repository, you are prepared from the get-go that use open standards, that have access to open tools, and just start trying building on solid foundations. So there you go. Jentic.com, MCP server, or just the Oak repository. And remember, like, subscribe, and let's tune next week for another episode of the AI Product Engineer. Until next time.